From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We didn't want to go up in the factory this morning, but the management forced us to go up and said there was no problem with the building. Just after that, I sat on my table to work, and the building just collapsed. I couldn't even leave. I was trapped at my table.
The death toll in Bangladesh has topped 200 after an 8-story garment factory building collapses with thousands of workers inside. This comes 5 months after a fire killed 112 workers at a Bangladeshi factory making clothes for Walmart. We'll speak with the head of the Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity and a garment worker who survived the factory fire in November. Then a Yemeni youth activist and journalist speaks out about Obama's drone war.
When they think of America, they think of the terror they feel from the drones that hover over their heads, ready to fire missiles at any time. What a violent militants had previously failed to achieve, one drone strike accomplished in an instant.
Last week, a U.S. drone attacked Faria al-Muslimi's village in Yemen. On Tuesday, he testified during the Senate's first-ever hearing on drones and targeted killings. Today, he joins us live. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thousands of workers have walked off the job in Bangladesh today as the death toll from a collapsed garment building continues to soar. Around 200 people have been found dead in the rubble after an 8-story building housing garment factories collapsed near the capital, Dhaka. More than 1,000 people were injured. An unknown number of workers are still trapped in the wreckage. Most of the dead were young female workers. Cracks had been found in the building, but employees say the factory owners forced them to work anyway. The Bangladeshi government has declared a national day of mourning. Angry workers have blocked key highways today, marched on several factories, and rallied outside the headquarters of Bangladesh's main manufacturers group in Dhaka. We'll have more on the story after headlines. More details have emerged on how U.S. intelligence agencies have handled warnings about one of the Boston Marathon bombing suspects well before the attacks. The National Counterterrorism Center added that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev to the government's main terrorism watch list more than a year ago at the CIA's request. The move came after the Russian government delayed concerns about him to the CIA, as it had also done with the FBI. The FBI had interviewed him, but had found no evidence of wrongdoing. On Wednesday, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney defended the FBI's claim it did everything it could have done with the information it had at the time.
You know, all of these issues are obviously under investigation. What we do know is that the FBI took action in response to that notification, investigated the elder brother, and investigated thoroughly, and came to the conclusion that there was no derogatory information, no indication of terrorist activity or associations, either foreign or domestic, at that time.
News that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was on the intelligence radar is spurring calls for federal agencies to re-examine their priorities, particularly focus on sting operations that critics say constitute entrapment. In an editorial, The Washington Post writes, quote, "The FBI has devoted considerable resources to sting operations against people it judges to be terror suspects, sometimes on what look like dubious grounds. It's not clear that a sometimes far-fetched plot would have gone forward without the encouragement and help of FBI informants." Investigators who've interrogated his surviving brother, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, say the two were motivated by the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. On Wednesday, federal officials said that despite earlier reports, Dzhokhar was unarmed when he was detained inside a boat where he had hidden to escape a citywide manhunt. Police had opened fire on the boat before he was detained. Speaking at the memorial for Sean Collier, the MIT police officer allegedly killed by one of the brothers last week, Vice President Joe Biden called the two knockoff jihadists.
They can never defeat us. They can never overthrow us. They can never occupy us. So why? Why? Whether it's al-Qaeda Central out of the Fatah or two twisted, perverted, cowardly knockoff jihadis here in Boston. Why do they do what they do?
Hundreds of low-wage workers walked off the job in Chicago Wednesday to call for an increased hourly wage and the right to form a union without intimidation. Beginning at dawn with a rally at Chicago's Union Station, the strike hit retail and fast food giants, including McDonald's, Subway, Dunkin' Donuts, Macy's, Victoria's Secret, and Sears. Calling for a wage hike to $15 an hour, the workers moved through Chicago's shopping district with the chant of, "We can't survive on 825. Lorraine Chavez of the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago said low-wage workers are being overburdened with substandard pay.
Many workers have 2 or 3 jobs, and they're still qualified for poverty-level assistance, like food stamps and rental assistance. So they're working full-time, and they're simply unable to even pay for the bare necessities of life.
More than 400 workers took part in a similar one-day strike in New York City earlier this month. Chicago was also the site Wednesday of a student walkout against standardized testing. Organizers say over 300 students at more than 25 Chicago public schools boycotted the second day of a statewide standardized exam. The student boycotters met up for a rally outside a school district meeting where they also urged officials to stop the planned closure of 54 Chicago schools. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has publicly rebuffed the Israeli government's claim that the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons against rebel fighters. Israel has sought to prove chemical weapons use by Syria in order to trigger the red line for intervention floated by Obama. But speaking during a visit to Egypt, Hagel said no conclusive evidence has emerged.
Well, I don't think there's any danger. Suspicions are one thing. Evidence is another. I think we have to be very careful here before we make any conclusions, draw any conclusions based on real intelligence. And that's not at all questioning other nations' intelligence, but the United States relies on its own intelligence and must.
U.S.-backed monarchy in Bahrain is again blocking a visit by a top United Nations official seeking to assess conditions on the ground in Bahrain. Juan Mendez, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, says the Bahraini regime has effectively canceled his planned trip to the country next month. The move comes a little over a year after the regime also blocked a visit by Mendez and Amnesty International. The move comes amidst a continued crackdown on opposition protesters, with demonstrations repressed and scores of dissidents held behind bars. In a statement, Mendez said the regime's latest postponement, quote, could be perceived as if there is something to hide, unquote. Bahrain is a key U.S. government ally hosting the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. The Environmental Protection Agency has issued a surprising public challenge to a State Department impact study that effectively endorsed the Keystone XL pipeline. Released last month, the long-awaited assessment concluded the Keystone XL does not threaten the global climate and would lead to fewer emissions than critics have alleged. The State Department's review marked a major boost to the Keystone XL pipeline's chances as President Obama mulls whether to approve or reject it. But in an unprecedented letter, the EPA said the State Department had used insufficient information to reach its conclusion. The EPA letter singles out the review's conclusion that building the pipeline will not adversely affect climate change nor impact whether tar sands oil is extracted. The letter was submitted as part of the project's public comment period, which ended on Monday, Earth Day. Environmentalists say the comment period yielded over 1 million submissions opposing the pipeline's construction. A number of lawmakers came under criticism Wednesday when they failed to show up for a congressional hearing on long-term unemployment. Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota was the only lawmaker present when the Joint Economic Committee session began. She was later joined by 3 others, all of them Democrats, leaving a total of 16 committee members absent. A federal judge has ordered the Pentagon to disclose the names of those who teach and learn at a controversial military training school in Georgia. Formerly known as the School of the Americas, the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, or WISC, has been used to train Latin American soldiers and police forces, including scores linked to abuses. In a ruling this week, District Judge Phyllis Hamilton of California said the military must provide names for the past 8 years of the school's operations. Judge Hamilton rejected the government's argument that such a disclosure would violate privacy by saying the public interest carries more weight. In a statement, the group School of the Americas Watch, whose members brought the case, called the decision, quote, a victory for transparency and human rights and against government secrecy. A shooting incident has killed 5 people in the small Illinois town of Manchester. A police spokesperson said 2 of the victims were small children.
Range from a small infant to adults, or through to the adult age, with 2 of the victims being male children, an adult male, and 2 adult females. There's also a female child in critical condition at an area hospital.
It was the second time a shooting killed 5 people this week following an earlier incident outside of Seattle on Monday. The coach of the pair of Ohio high school football players convicted last month of raping a 16-year-old girl has had his contract renewed for 2 more years. The 2 players were convicted of sexually assaulting the victim, who witnesses testified was too drunk to move or speak. The case sparked a national controversy following the emergence of images and social media postings from the night of the assault, including one picture of the defendants holding the victim over a basement floor. Steubenville football coach Reno Socaccia was given a contract extension despite allegations he helped cover up the allegations and failed to report the case to authorities. He's among those who could come under further scrutiny when a grand jury convenes later this month. 25 people, including 13 prison guards, have been indicted for assisting a prison gang in Baltimore. The defendants are accused of helping smuggle drugs and goods into several Baltimore facilities to help the Black Guerrilla family and its alleged ringleader, Tavon White. Prosecutors said White apparently impregnated 4 female prison guards, one of them twice.
This case is insidious. This case is extremely serious.
He corrupted a number of correctional officers by developing personal relationships with them, by developing sexual relationships with them, and by paying them in order to facilitate gang activity behind bars.
In Alabama, 3 people were critically wounded after 2 fuel barges exploded on the Mobile River. Area residents said the blast shook their homes. A massive fire continued to burn overnight, with flames shooting into the air as it was deemed unsafe for firefighters to approach. The barges were reportedly carrying volatile natural gasoline. A hacker group called the Syrian Electronic Army is taking credit for hacking the Twitter account of the Associated Press earlier this week. Financial markets were briefly thrown into turmoil when the AP's hacked account falsely claimed President Obama had been injured in a blast at the White House. The Syrian Electronic Army bills itself as supportive of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, but the Syrian government has distanced itself from the incident. And the Rhode Island State Senate has approved a measure that would legalize marriage for same-sex couples. The State House is expected to pass the measure as soon as next week, and Governor Lincoln Chafee says he will sign it. Rhode Island would become the 10th state to legalize marriage equality. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country.
Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.